In this lesson, we're going to talk about class interfaces. Right now in your programming career, interfaces are not going to be that important. However, as you get into your next courses, especially into data structures, and as you expose your code to APIs and you start talking to other applications, creating interfaces is going to be very important to establish what that method of communication will be and what the contract will be between your application and who you're communicating with. An interface, in a nutshell, is a contract. It is a blueprint for a class that states, my class will look like this and behave like this. It will have these properties and these methods available. Once you define an interface, you build a class that meets those requirements that you've stated. So let's build an interface real quick. Interface iAnimal. So to build an interface, we're going to create a contract that defines what an animal does and how to describe an animal. So here we will say that an animal always has a name. String name get set. An animal always has a name. And then we will say, and it has to have a getter and setter. That is the property an animal must always have. An animal must always have a greet method. And there you go. So what we've done is we've created a blueprint for a class that says, if you are going to be an animal, you must, number one, have a name, and number two, you must be able to greet us. Why is this important? If I have another application and I've created an animal in our application, I want that other application to be able to understand what an animal is and does, I have to have a contract. I have to say, this is what an animal looks like, this is what an animal does, and that other application has to have the same contract. This could extend to libraries or extensions and other things you will learn about. However, it's important to understand that in order to communicate properly, you have to have a contract. You have to have an understanding on both sides of what the requirements are, and you define that through what's called an interface. Let's go over the syntax here. You use the word interface, that's the key word, and then you name your interface. An interface name begins with the capital letter I, and then another capital letter for the name you're giving your interface in camel case. So if it was an interface for lead pencil, it would be I lead pencil, capital I, capital L, capital P. In this case, it's iAnimal, capital I, capital A. Once you've defined your interface and all of the members that must be a part of that interface, you can build a class that uses this interface. So we will build an animal class. Now, a difference is here, iAnimal is the interface and animal is the class. So class animal, public, string name. It's going to be an auto property. That's going to be our property. And public void greet. And here we define the method. So what have we done here? Oh, and also we have to state that it is using the interface iAnimal. Same syntax as inheriting from a base class. So let's walk through the code and explain it. I have defined an interface called iAnimal. Any class that is using this interface, this contract, must have a name and it must have a method called greet that is void and has no parameters. So I have then defined a class called animal using interface iAnimal. I have created an auto property called name because the definition says I have to. And then I have created a method called greet because the definition says I have to. At another point to the interface definitions, you don't put content in them. You basically just define their presence. So here in the property, I have defined its presence as it has a getter, has a setter. I have defined the presence of a method, and you see I put a semicolon here. I do not put a method body in the interface. Rather, the class that uses the interface, I define the method. Now we have completed this contract. We have a contract that is of the iAnimal interface, and we can then use the class in our main method. So animal, myAnimal equals new animal, and then we can call the greet method. And if we run this application, we see our animal has greeted us. And as we talked about before with inheritance, we can then turn this animal class that implements iAnimal into the base class of a class called dog that inherits from animal. So we have a virtual method, and now we have class dog, which inherits from animal, which in turn uses the interface iAnimal because animal uses it, and we can override greet And if we run this again after changing myAnimal to dog, we see that the screen now says woof. So you can use the class dog just like we did before when talking about inheritance, but in this we've created a contract or an interface called iAnimal, which these classes must follow. And again, when we created the animal class, we followed that contract. We won't get into the nitty-gritty about interfaces. I just wanted you to understand that these are here. They're an important part of class programming. They're very important when you start getting into enumerations and comparability between classes. For instance, how do I know one dog is equal to another dog? You can, for instance, use the iComparable interface to define, what is comparability? What is equal to? What is less than? What is greater than? You can use interfaces to create contracts that can be understood by other libraries or other applications.